All right, part two. We're on page 3, so there's a lot of material here. So, ancient faith approach and Enneagram. So, I was really struck by the difference when I was looking at spiritual warfare, the difference operating in the Eastern and the Western perspectives. So, you had the Eastern Church, and I listened to, and I've read stuff. I mean, I was trying to get new material. The Western is Protestantism and Roman Catholic. Liberal churches don't have much about spiritual warfare. Probably the closest they come is like social justice stuff. So all the racism talk, all the sexism talk, all the isms talk. The progressives see spiritual warfare primarily as a political process. And it's if there's evil in the world, the evil is conservatives, I guess. I don't know. And a lot of modernist traditionalists, conservatives, view spiritual warfare primarily in terms of, well, liberals, they're the devil. Communism and liberals, they're the devil. But in the teachings of Protestant, Catholic, and Eastern Orthodox, like teachers, priests, and ministers, what they do is they hone in on one aspect of spiritual warfare. And let's be clear, spiritual warfare, in fact, impacts our physical health, our mental health, our emotional health, our relational health, our family, our relationship to food and alcohol, our relationship to exercise, and our social interactions, economic interactions, the military, every aspect of our life, the global, families, churches. It's all under the rubric of spiritual warfare. Well, you can't talk about everything. That's why I'm ending up spending all this time doing fill-in material from a sermon to try to give some idea what I was trying to hint at in my sermon. If we understand that all of our institutions, our village, our town, our state, our nation, the world, all of it, if we understand them in terms of spiritual warfare, then we're onto the truth. But we must understand that it's also dangerous to see that, because when you see politics in terms of spiritual warfare, what ends up happening is you quickly disintegrate into projection. So the other party, the other belief system is the devil, and we're the angels. And I know people can say, don't minimize, don't deny. And I hear people say that, but I'm here to tell you, Jesus's adversaries were the pagan Romans and the most religious group in his time, which was the priests and the Pharisees. And the Pharisees and priests were not friends, for the most part. Pharisees was a lay movement. So the religious leaders in both the lay state and in the ordained, the institutional religion, the Herodians who were imposing their rule, the Romans who were outsiders, they were all against Jesus. And whatever group you were in, you thought the other guys were the bad guys, and that blinds you to the fact that you're the bad guy too. So we need to understand that the global issue of, is communism godless? Yes. Is it evil? Yes. Does communism have any truth in it? Yes. Communism is basically Acts of the Apostles with Jesus cut out. So there's a lot of content in communism about sharing the wealth and all that's in Acts of the Apostles, in the early churches, in St. Paul, in Jesus teaching about sharing. Now, does that mean communism is Christian? No, because Jesus is missing in it. But capitalism is not. It's missing stuff too. So every institution, and by institution I mean practice of life as well as organization, is part of spiritual warfare. But we have to understand, and this is where the Eastern Fathers are so helpful, that at one level, and I'm going to say the primary level, the level we need to spend the most time, it's about guarding your soul, your life, the life animation inside of you. Remember, animos is soul in Latin. So animation, what animates me, what gives me life, the breath, the inner spirit. Each one of us, individually, idiosyncratically, as a person, Now we're in a community, so communities have to do it too, but it's going to be decided at the individual level. Now, if enough people in the society group make a decision, others will go along with it. But we need to understand that our soul is the battlefield. And that was in versions 1 and 3 of my sermon. I don't think it ends up being in the final form. Maybe it could show back up. Our soul is the first battlefield of spiritual warfare. And then our living communities. And then at a wider, the nation and all the other institutions and organizations. So, spiritual warfare has to do with guarding our minds from the bad thoughts that are lies, deceits of the world, the flesh, and the devil. And this is where, like a lot of people say, well, that's a lie straight from hell, which I believe that. But that's not all it is. Because it's also a lie from me. And I say this somewhere in the notes, and I'll repeat it. When Jesus they talked to him about eating food, he says, it's not what goes into a man that makes him unclean, it's what comes out of his heart. Now, I'm not saying there's not a devil. I'm not saying the devil doesn't deceive us and all that. But Adam and Eve fell because of what was in their heart as much as what the serpent did. The serpent didn't put something in their hearts that wasn't there. The serpent played with them because there was something in their heart. There was an openness to doubt God. That is the fundamental sin. So spiritual warfare is always about, will I trust God? Will I be faithful to God? Will I be loyally trusting? Will I love God? Will I give myself to God, or will I keep myself to myself because I can't trust God and I only trust myself? And at the point we make the decision to only trust ourselves, then we become, we're separated from the herd, and that's when the roaring lion comes and gets us. So that is, I would argue, the fundamental and most important point of spiritual warfare. Dealing with doubt in my life. So once you let doubt take hold and you make decisions based on doubt, doubt produces anger because things aren't the way we want them to be. Doubt produces anxiety because we're not sure what to do. And doubt produces fear because we're at risk. Anger, anxiety, and fear operate in every human being because all human beings have doubt. But one of those three is primary. So one of those is the driving force in our lives. And I really want to talk about this in spiritual warfare. And this was my second homily, which I ended up cutting this up. But I'm bringing it here because I want people to understand that the false self that we generate out of our fear, anxiety, and anger is about how we try to save ourselves. How we try to make ourselves where we can fit in the world, how we can avoid more wounds, more pain, how we can live without God, because we're not trusting God completely. And even when we believe in God, there's parts of us that are still, God's still plan B. He's plan A, but we still have plan B, and we operate from plan B. So doubt creates anger, fear, anxiety. Those three then produce the false self, which finds a way to live in the world, and that includes the whole I'm a Christian, I'm a good guy, I'm a loving person, I'm a helpful person, I'm successful. All the things that we use to describe ourselves, those are all the false selves. So we need to discern what the lies are, because here are the lies. God, you have to earn God's love. That's a lie, right? Or what you do doesn't matter because it's all grace. Really? It doesn't matter. Now think about that. I hear people say that all the time. And they believe that as long as they don't have to deal with concrete lies, like people doing things that they think are wrong and say, wait, you can't do that. Well, what happened to, it doesn't matter what I do as long as I trust. So, discerning the lies and falsehood is at the heart of spiritual warfare. Recognizing the fallen world will be a barrier to our relationship with God is at the heart of spiritual warfare. And understanding that not only the world, but ourselves is the problem. And as well as that there's these forces at work. And remember the demonic, the gods, they've been around forever. They've been around forever. You and I, I've been here 6 decades. Most of us have been here 3, 4. Some of you have been here 30, 40 years. The oldest among you has been here 70 or 80. I don't think there's anybody listening to me who's been here more than 100 years. So when you compare that time frame with tens of thousands of years, I think you get the point. So, learning how the image of God has been distorted in us, how it's been covered over, how it's been lost in terms of not that we're not the image of God anymore, but that we don't recognize that we are, we've forgotten it. And that's part of it too. The spiritual forgetting. That's part of the battle of how God's going to save us and how we have to cooperate. So we are cooperating with God in this. So what's the word of Ephesians? So here's how we cooperate with God. So the armor image is a metaphor, and the Bible's filled with different metaphors. Paul also calls the life of Christianity is like a running a race, being an athlete. And the problem I find for myself with the armor imagery is it so kind of appeals to my masculine worldview. So, in this true story, I went to a conference once, and we were praying in groups. There's 4 of us, and none of the 3 people knew who I was. And what we're doing is praying for God to speak to us. And one of the women said to me, "I just saw you with this armor, and I don't know what it means, but I saw you armor." Well, that morning I'd been reading Ephesians, and I was very much involved in that because the movie Braveheart, being faithful in the face of overwhelming odds, was a mythical. It was a myth that was operating in me. It was a Christian myth. It was it resonated with me in my sense of how will I be faithful in the fact that I think I'm going to lose the battle, that we're going to lose the battle. We're going to win the war eventually, but it's not going to turn out well for me. Well, the other woman said, when I was praying, I just heard Braveheart. Have you ever heard that movie? Do you know what it is? And I got a tear in my eye because, I knew what it was. So these are 3 women I didn't know, and 2 of them, one that had another thing that also resonated, but 2 of them, one the armor of God and the other Braveheart, which is also about war. So that imagery appeals to me and makes sense to me because of the books I read, the Once and Future King, and it's very dramatic. And also the armor of God is very particular. So you have the helmet and the breast of righteousness and the truth and the feet. But I got so concrete and materialistic with it that I was trying to figure out why salvation is on the head. And I lost the fact that if you take out all the armor parts, that all he's doing is looking at a guy dressed up for war and saying, here's what the Christian life looked like. So don't get too sucked into the particular here. What Paul says is we're not battling other people. So if you're a Democrat and you think Republicans are bad, fine. But the issue's not them. It's the spiritual powers at work in them and around them and through them. And that's the real enemy. And until each one of us is set free from those powers, we're going to be at odds with one another. Because remember, the purpose of the gods is to ruin God's creation. The small g gods who are in rebellion can't hurt God, but they can hurt us. And that's how they attack God, by hurting us. And God's created a world of freedom. So all of us are captive of these spirits. And like the Israelites, we've escaped Egypt, but we're wandering in the desert, and we're not totally free yet, and we're always prone to wander in the wrong direction, and we're still looking at the golden calves and remembering the good old days, and we're not 100% with Yahweh. And we're going to fail. Every day we fail. Individually, corporately, the whole mess. So, we have to stand for Jesus. And I'm going to stop there.